almost everything you've heard about flow is wrong. Flow is one of the most famous ideas in psychology, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. Flow is not about relaxing. It's not about meditating, and it's not about being comfortable. The concept of flow was developed by a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, and I studied with him as a Ph.D. student. I remember that he insisted that all of his students call him Mike because he knew his last name, Csikszentmihalyi, was so hard to say. When I arrived there in 1990, he had just published a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And this book influenced millions of people. It was a book that changed how psychologists think about experience, how they think about personal fulfillment, and how they think about happiness and attaining a happy life. But the way people use the word flow today isn't exactly what he meant. Today, we think about flow as a time of meditation, of being in the groove, of a maximum enjoyment. But according to Mike, that's not where we find peak experience. Flow is not about relaxing, but the core idea is simple, but powerful. The best moments in our lives are not when we're relaxed and comfortable. They happen when we're completely absorbed in a challenging activity. So think about a time when you were fully engaged. Let's say you were writing, or you were teaching, or solving a problem, and you lost track of time. That's what Mike was trying to explain. Flow refers to those moments of total involvement when your attention is fully focused and you're deeply engaged in what you're doing. Mike defined optimal experience this way, and here's a quotation: "Contrary to what we believe, the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Optimal experience is something that we make happen." And that was the powerful message of the book. You don't have to wait passively for it to come to you. You can make it happen if you can accomplish the three principles of the flow state. But Mike added something at this point that most people forget. And here's another quotation: "Such experiences are not necessarily pleasant at the time that they occur." They're not necessarily pleasant at the time that they occur. And that's the thing people tend to forget about the flow state. That's why I say it's not meditative. It's not necessarily about happiness even. It could be unpleasant at that moment. Flow is not about feeling good in that moment. It's about being fully engaged in something that matters. Well, how do you get into flow? Flow happens when three conditions are present, and the three conditions that you're in control of. The first one is clear goals. You know exactly what you're trying to do. The second one is that you're getting immediate feedback. You know instantly whether you're succeeding or not from moment to moment, not all the way at the end, but during the task. And the third one is a balance between challenges and skills. The challenge has to slightly exceed your skill. If your skills exceed the challenges, then you just get bored. You're not going to be in that flow state of peak experience. So when those three conditions are met, something interesting happens. You lose track of time. You often forget about the self, about yourself, and you become completely absorbed in the activity. So one of the most important insights of the book is this one: external rewards do not guarantee satisfaction. We tend to think that happiness comes from money or comfort or success, but what it matters more is how we experience what we're doing. It's about our experience, our subjective experience. It's not about things external to us. One of the clearest examples of flow happens in rock climbing, and that was something Mike was particularly interested in himself. He was a mountain climber. There's a famous answer that climbers give when people ask them, "Why do you climb the mountain?" And the answer is, "Because it's there." And it's kind of a joking answer, but it gets at something very profound. You don't climb the mountain to get to the top. You could just walk up the same path as everyone else, but you climb up the cliff face instead because it's the activity of climbing itself that's rewarding. And there are the three conditions of flow. You know what the end goal is. It's a clear goal, which is to get up to the top without falling off. The second is that you get immediate feedback. I mean, you're putting your hands all the way up one by one. You know whether you're doing it right from moment to moment. And the third is the balance between challenge and skills, because rock climbers will actually choose a rock face knowing whether it's going to be that challenge for them and knowing whether their skills allow them to get up that particular cliff face. Happiness is not about money. In fact, there's a lot of research showing that people in wealthy societies are not necessarily happier. Flow comes from the rewards inside the activity. It's called intrinsic motivation, like I talked about in the last episode with Professor Teresa Amamale. Well, the idea of flow is incredibly important because it's spread far beyond psychology. Flow has influenced education, it's influenced business. Of course, it's influenced creativity research because there's a lot of research showing that when you're in this flow state of peak experience, you're more likely to be creative. There's a close link between flow and creativity. And the concept also helped lay the foundation for a new field called positive psychology. Mike helped found that field with another psychologist named Martin Seligman. Today, we see the influence of flow everywhere. Companies are trying to create meaningful work, and they're trying to measure employee engagement. They know that when their workers have this intrinsic motivation and they're more likely to get into the flow state, they'll be more satisfied at work and they'll also be higher performers and they'll be more likely to be creative. And schools are focused on students in a different way, not just about academic learning, but how do we get them into this flow state of peak experience? And some of those things are student well-being, resilience, motivation. All these things come from positive psychology and from research on flow. And there's a lot of evidence that when a learner is intrinsically motivated, if we can get those learners into the flow state, then they get to a deeper form of learning. They really understand the material much better. So all of this traces back to the idea of flow, all the way back from the early 1990s. Well, I have some personal reflections about the concept of flow because I took a class with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi in 1990. It was my first term at the University of Chicago, and it was my introduction to the field of creativity research. I mean, the class was called The Psychology of Creativity. And I remember Mike was a wonderful teacher, a wonderful mentor. He was quiet, he was thoughtful, he was genuinely humble. And I guess it goes without saying that he was brilliant and insightful about his own research, an incredibly innovative researcher. But he never acted like a celebrity, even though we were all in awe of everything that he had accomplished. And we all knew he was one of the most famous psychologists in the United States, even already in the 1990s. More than 30 years after the book was published, flow remains one of the most influential ideas in psychology. The most satisfying moments in life are not the ones when we're relaxed. They're the ones when we're fully engaged. We're fully engaged in something meaningful that challenges us. In the final paragraph of Mike's book, he turns from the individual to the society. And here he writes, quote, "We now need to learn how to reunite ourselves with other entities around us without losing our hard-won individuality. We need to accept a cooperative rather than a ruling role in the universe. The problem of meaning will be resolved as the individual's purpose merges with the universal flow." Merges with the universal flow. I love that. And even at the end of this book about individual experience, right, about subjective well-being, he was pointing towards something larger than the individual, towards connection, toward cooperation. In the next episode, I'm going to extend this idea beyond the individual to what happens when groups get into flow together. I call it group flow. If you're interested in the science of creativity, then please subscribe to hear about more episodes like this one.